Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Radio 5G. This is Michael Henry Dunn with my co-host Nancy Hopkins. And today we are really pleased to welcome back our good friend and special guest, Falcon Britt. So welcome, Falcon. Glad to have you back.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you.
And for those who may have not heard the previous shows with Falcon, she is an educator and committed 5G activist. And I'd go ahead and describe you as a highly educated mystic, very well aware of a number of different aspects of the big picture going on. And that's a beautiful combination and a rare one to me, to have someone who can, articulate both the scientific aspect, the political aspect, and, the spiritual esoteric aspects of what's going on, not just with the campaign to stop the 5G rollout, but, with the bigger picture for the recovery of the planet and of human freedom. So I am glad you're back with us. This is great. And good morning, Nancy. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. I was in chat because I'm not sure what's happening. My internet seems to have a little bit of issues with the players, and it's also on my cell phone. It may be that the website is slow. I've got it up on the computer, but I'm not exactly sure what might be happening. So
I have also watched my power glitch twice this morning. Maybe there's some incoming from the sun or something that's affecting technology this morning. So just be aware of that, audience. We're doing the best we can here.
Yep, we're just going to keep going and record it, but I just, that's what I was doing, was putting in chat. If you can see chat and you can't see the player, well, I'm not sure what to tell you. It could be the website. And it could just be me. But my phone is also doing the same thing, so.
Oh, okay. So we're not quite sure we're going out on the air, but we're recording for later broadcast if need be, right?
Yes, essentially. I think,
okay.
I know I'm live on the computer right now, but like I say, it seems to be glitchy. So let's just go. It might just settle down. Sometimes it's a website thing. But yes, I'm doing fine, and I'm so excited that Falcon is here because she brings so much to the table.
Well, geez, anytime I need an ego lift, I'm just going to come talk to you guys. You always make me feel like I'm magical.
Well,
yeah, why not? What are friends for, after all?
Absolutely, geez.
Yeah. Well, so, Falcon, what are you seeing and feeling these days, just in terms of, the overall big picture? If there's any, particular impression or movement or dynamic that you're sensing these days, and I'm talking again about the combination, the big picture between. The etheric, the political, how, people that we know in Taos and in northern New Mexico, are being impacted. What are you looking at these days?
I'm sensing shift. I tend to feel the world energies as an intuitive, and you can't help notice also the number of articles that are coming out where people are protesting in various places around the world and starting to make headway. And it's gaining traction on Facebook. I see more and more articles being passed around. They're noticing the issue more, and they're finding ways to take action more. There's more people in the streets in various places. I did find it interesting that now AT&T and other carriers are trying to hide the maps of where they're putting the 5G antennas. They've even openly submitted some papers to the FCC that they do not want to reveal where their antennas really are. And I'm thinking, oh, sure, great, nothing suspicious about that. We just want to put directed energy weaponry and hiding all around you in locations and not tell you where it is. Nothing to see here. Move along.
Right, completely safe technology, and we just don't want the ignorant vigilante conspiracy theorists to go pulling down our towers.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
If that's the pretext on which they're doing it, other people that wrote the article seemed to be under the impression it was because they didn't want to admit how poor their coverage is. The article is at ARS Tecnica, ARS Tecnica, ARStechnica.com, where they discuss that they openly don't want people to know that it's limited availability. But of course, we know it goes a lot deeper than that.
Right, and my understanding is that in the larger cities, that it has been rolled out. Whether or not it is active in all those cities, I mean, I'm from Chicago originally. I recently went back to the Midwest on a family trip, and I was driving down from Wisconsin, and the ubiquity of the towers along the interstate. Maybe it's just because I know what to look for now, but I don't think so. It was like, once I got past Rockford, Illinois, on I-90, it was just mind-blowing that it wouldn't be, every 2-3 miles, but for right along the interstate, I'd see right along the interstate, I'd see a string of, what were certainly 4G, if not 5G tower. Now, of course, we know 5G is a completely different technology. It's being rolled out on the LED street lamp. It needs to be much, much closer together than the other towers. I'm just feeling concerned about this very issue, about how we can identify where they have been rolled out, because we know that in many instances it appears to be covertly, that as in Gateshead in England, which now has the highest infant mortality rate in all of the UK, where our good friend and amazing activist Mark Steele has been leading the fight. That there's just some appalling statistics coming out of the places where it is known to have been rolled out.
Oh yeah,
the epidemiological information coming out there about rises in tumors, infant mortality. If that doesn't get people ticked off, nothing will.
Yes. Well, the Swiss have taken to the streets. If you go to healthimpactnews.com, healthimpactnews.com, they have an article. They're having new illnesses, and but they are in the streets with signs, and they are ticked off. And it's definitely awareness is rising, and I think that we can shift this. And of course, they've also not just putting 5G on their signs. Some of the people have got 3G and 4G. They're aware of the fact that this is a multi-layered technology. This is multiple levels of bombardment, and I think we really are seeing that what I call Team Dark, they've overplayed their hand. They have rushed this out, and you're right that it's everywhere. It is ubiquitous. Even in tiny little Espanola, which is down to the south of Taos, they've put this gigantic, very clearly 5G tower right beside the movie theater. So and it's the multiplex. And so anyone going to the movies in this little small town, and there's not that much to do there, it's a lovely place, but you go sit in the movies and you're going to get dosed real hard. And you can't avoid it.
Yeah, I'd like to share with everybody. I've got this article up from Health Impact News. And this is this is absolutely current. This is October 16th. Healthimpactnews.com. The headline, Swiss citizens take to the streets to protest 5G implementation as new illnesses start at the same time. let me read some of this. If you want to get an idea of what will happen in the U.S. when the telecom companies start rolling out 5G networks with new towers in your local neighborhood, take a look at what is happening in Switzerland today, where 90% of the population is now exposed to the new 5G networks. People are getting sick, and they are marching in the streets to show their opposition to the new networks. And here's a report from Yahoo News, which they are quoting in this article in Health Impact News. Thousands of people protested in the Swiss capital of Bern on Saturday, and that's September 21st, over the rollout of a 5G wireless technology across the country, which they fear could damage people's health. The protesters, many carrying placards, gathered in front of the Swiss Parliament building in a bid to stop the construction of more 5G-compatible antennae. And here's a quote from Tamlin Schibler-Ullman, who is co-president of Frequencia, the group that organized the rally. The fact that so many people turned out today is a strong sign against the uncontrolled introduction of 5G. Critics in Switzerland argue that the electromagnetic radiation the new system emits poses unprecedented health and environmental risks compared to previous generations of mobile technology. Online petitions have helped persuade several Swiss cantons, and a canton is the name for a province or state within the Swiss Federation. Other cantons, including Geneva, Vaud, Freiburg, and Neuchâtel, to postpone the construction of antennae as a precaution. The Swiss Federation of Doctors has also argued for a cautious approach to the new technology. And cautious, you could say that. You could also, the principle that they are invoking, which is a traditional, well understood, very embedded principle in international law and in the UN, is the precautionary principle that you don't introduce a new technology, a new treatment, a major new element into the environment without honoring the precautionary principle of ensuring safety. So the first injuries due to 5G are now being reported in Switzerland, according to Physicians for Safe Technology. The first reported injury of 5G in a news report comes from Switzerland, where 5G has been launched in 102 locations. The weekly French-language Swiss magazine L'Illustré interviewed people living in Geneva after the 5G rollout with alarming details of illness. In their article entitled "With 5G We Feel Like Guinea Pigs," posted on July 18th of this year, they report neighbors met to discuss their many common symptoms and many unanswered questions. As soon as the antennas were installed, several residents and entire families in the heart of Geneva reported similar unusual symptoms of loud ringing in the ear, intense headaches, unbearable earaches, insomnia, chest pain, fatigue, and not feeling well in the house. 29-year-old Geneva resident Johann Perashud called up Swisscom and was told that indeed the 5G cell towers were activated on the same day he began to feel the symptoms. When others called Swisscom, they were told everything is legal and within guidelines. Dr. Bertrand Buchs, who has also called for a 5G moratorium, states he has seen more and more patients with similar system. He notes, quote, "In this case, our authorities are going against common sense. We risk experiencing a catastrophe in a few years. No serious study exists yet, which is not surprising when we know that this technology was developed in China." Of course, China, being an authoritarian state, has no meaningful activist opposition to whatever the state decides is going to be rolled out. No serious study exists, which is not surprising when we know this technology was developed in China, then to the United States. And unfortunately, this is me talking again, we are seeing a similar situation developing, sad to say, in the U.S., as in authoritarian China, where the agency which is obligated to protect the citizens, namely the Federal Communications Commission, is entirely run by executives of big telecom companies. It's a captive agency, and they are simply in the business of making sure that lobbyists, make sure that legislation is in place which completely steamrolls any local opposition or any local sovereign authority under the 10th Amendment to the Constitution can stand in the way of the 5G rollout. So unfortunately, China and the U.S. are becoming similar in this regard. Back to the article, excuse me. In Switzerland, we could open a line for people who feel bad, listen to these complaints, and examine them. Our country has the means and the skills. The debate must be launched because the story is not about to end. And they go on to ask the question, are telecom giants influencing U.S. government to override local opposition to 5G? Yeah, you could say that. Local opposition to the installation of 5G networks has been strong in the U.S. More than 24 municipalities, counties, and organizations, I think it's actually well over 100 now, are suing the FCC and the U.S. government for forcing them to submit to every desire of telecom companies as they roll out 5G. Opposition has been strong in the UK as well, where one man was sentenced to jail for speaking out. So anyway, we're going to post this for you, and we encourage everybody to share it around. This is very solid information. This is hitting mainstream. They are quoting a Yahoo News report, and Yahoo actually has a very well-funded and pretty competent journalistic wing. So anyway, as you say, Falcon, we are seeing it's beginning to hit mainstream. It's beginning to become unignorable. Are you seeing a follow-up to the activist work that's been done in Taos?
Taos is a strange and slow place. In the summer, it's like it goes on hiatus. Everybody gets busy because in the winters it's so harsh here in the high desert. And so they go out and play, and they then come back to life, the things that need to be dealt with somewhat more in the fall. I did want to mention, however, another article that I came across. If you go to the Alliance for Natural Health, and I'm going to send this link to Nancy so she can put it up. There are now a couple of new bills that have been introduced in the House and in the Senate, and they will, if these bills pass, and we need to sign them and petition and push for these bills, in my opinion, if these bills pass, it will at least give local communities more control over how the 5G gets installed. Now, of course, at this point, because they have sabotaged the democratic process so extensively, it's not that we get to say, no, we're not going to have it at all. That may be the next step. But it at least gives us an intermediate step to start making changes. But if you go to the Alliance for Natural Health, you'll see it says more local control over 5G. And these bills have been introduced. I'm going to send it to you also, Michael, that link. So people they're waking up, of course, and getting more and more concerned and speaking out more. It's still a little frustrating, I think, at the local level when people seem to think that this is a matter of how big is it. Oh, well, if it's not a tall tower, it can't be doing that much damage. It's just a little one. And, of course, the logic of that from a scientific perspective makes no sense at all. It only takes a tiny molecule of certain poisons to take you out. And in this case, a smaller tower can be, in fact, much more toxic than a larger one. And whether you see it or not is not the point. If it's on your street light and it's still designed to do basically energy weaponry that makes you feel like your skin is on fire, which these things do have the ability to do, as Mark Steele has pointed out, the capacitors on them are far larger than anything that would be needed for telecommunications. With the remote touch of a button, you've got crowd control, And if it's true, what I have heard about the ability of these weapons, and I've been researching it to some degree, if you set the proper frequency, you can zap I shouldn't laugh. It's just so shocking. I don't know whether to laugh or fall over. You can zap a person pretty much out of existence. And if you look at Paradise, the fires that happened in Paradise, California, the extreme strange things that went there, bodies that literally disappeared. And you just don't see that in normal fires. You see bones left over, and you certainly don't see things, you don't see people's cars and bodies just kind of flash out of existence. So these directed energy weapons are in fact in existence, and they're not new. We've had people that have been in directed energy weaponry for decades, enough to retire from it now. And it's been taken to very high levels. And of course, also the ability not just to zap people, which of course is a very obvious action. You're not going to do it very often as a government if you have to do it at all to take control. But mind control through the induction of emotional states. This is also something that is being used, because the lower they can keep our consciousness, the more they can keep us under control. And these are dark things, but and it sounds extremely paranoid to say them. I realize it, but we have to wake up to the reality that there are people who are so convinced that control is their right over others, dominion and hierarchy and control, and keeping things the way they are so that they can continue apparently to amass more money and power, as if that's the point of human existence. We're going to have to recognize how dark things have gotten so that we can change them.
Yes, it's. I hear what you're saying about the being a paranoid sound of some of these things, but it's very well documented, as a military application of these kinds of technologies going back decades, when they realized they could, induce certain emotional states with the use of these frequencies. As reportedly used in Operation Desert Storm, as well as the Iraq War, that, this is where the technology has gotten to. And
can I jump in here and tell you a story?
Please.
Because I'm writing the book Shungite Reality, and I was in the chapter on what's entitled Enterology, and I was going back through some of the lesser known by most people, I mean we know them, people, and I started to write about it. Okay, so the first one that I connected with was Raymond Rife. And Dr. Rife worked in the 30s. And he developed the ability to be able, last week I played a video, a 6-minute video about them it was called the miracle frequency, and they're able to zap a cancer cell. In the case on the video, it was leukemia, but the cancer cell can actually be zapped with a frequency that causes it to vibrate until it essentially self-destruct. And it's very specific to the cancer cell, and it won't hurt anything around it. Okay, and this was big information. I mean, after I played the video on a couple of shows, I was seeing, that it was being reported in different areas too. But what this is really, not stunning information, because this is exactly what Rife did back in the 30s. He wasn't using the equipment they have now, because at that time all he had was those vacuum tubes. So it was, big equipment, but he was able to, he was very well known in his field, and he began to look at this ability to create a sympathetic resonance in a given microorganism. In this case, we're talking cells, and we're talking cancer. So what you got happening here is that the system that he was using, okay, was so effective on rats that the people that he was talking with professionally, knowing what was happening, were demanding a human trial. And he said, no, we need the human trial. And he said, well, if you're going to do it, then I want the best in the world to be monitoring it. And so they did this particular study on human beings who had been diagnosed with terminal cancer, 16 of them. And 100 days later, now it was 100 days later, but it was only like he was giving them this 2-minute radiation, not of radiation, but this radiating their bodies with the frequency that would destroy the cancer. And in 100 days, and this was only, it was a 2-minute thing, like once a week. I mean, it wasn't every day, and he did that because he determined that the ability of the body to eradicate the gunk that was left over from the destruction of the cancer cells, the lymphatic system needed time to clear it. So in 100 days, they had 100% cure rate.
Wow.
All right. Now, and then it ended. You find nothing more about what happened. Because we're talking the 30s, okay? And in the 30s, there was another dude by the name of Nikola Tesla. And let me see if I can't pull this up, because this was, let me see. Where did I put that? I have to look, because this was a statement from Tesla. Okay. Here, let me pull this one up. Oh, it's already up. Okay. Sorry about this. I didn't think I was going to be talking about this. Yeah, no. Okay. Yeah, okay. Here we go. All right. Okay. This is so amazing to me. This really is. All right. So I'm doing a little more research into this Raymond and this time frame, and I come across a blog that's talking about. And they actually have a copy of an excerpt from the New York World Telegram on July 11th, 1935. Okay, so this is the quote, the excerpt. Okay, Nikola Tesla revealed that an earthquake, which drew police and ambulances to the region of his laboratory at 48 East Houston Street, New York, in 1898. Was the result of a little machine he was experimenting with at the time, which you could put in your overcoat pocket. The bewildered newspaper men pounced upon this as at least one thing they could understand, and Nikola Tesla, the father of modern electricity, told what had happened as follows. Tesla stated, I was experimenting with vibrations. I had one of my machines going, and I wanted to see if I could get it in tune with the vibration of the building. I put it up a notch after notch. There was a peculiar cracking sound. I asked my assistants, where did that sound come from? They did not know. I put the machine up a few more notches. There was a louder cracking sound. I knew I was approaching the vibration of the steel building. I pushed the machine a little higher. Suddenly, all the heavy machinery in the place was flying around. I grabbed a hammer and broke the machine. The building would have been about our ears in another few minutes. Outside in the street, there was pandemonium, and the police and ambulances arrived. I told my assistants to say nothing. We told the police it must have been an earthquake. That's all they ever knew about it. Some shrewd reporter asked Dr. Tesla at this point what he would need to destroy the Empire State Building, and the doctor replied, vibration will do anything. It would only be necessary to step up the vibrations of the machine to fit the natural vibration of the building, and the building would come crashing down. That's why soldiers break step crossing a bridge. Now, he just described how the Twin Towers on 9/11 were taken down. That's why they turned to dust. That's why 110 floors ended up being no higher than 7 stories. They were all just molecularly disintegrated. But going back to Rife. He stated this at the same time frame that Rife was building his equipment. And all of a sudden, it shuts down. Now, I'm going like, did they really shut him down because he was curing cancer and the medical establishment was trying to survive? Because if you don't have sick people, you're not going to survive. And the pharmaceutical company, of course, well, the AMA had not been in existence for very long at that point in time. And I doubt that they had that much. And the pharmaceutical companies were, nothing compared to what they are now. So I'm not sure that would be such a factor that it would actually override all of those people that might have had family they knew that had cancer. This would have probably been the bigger story. But we're back in the 30s. They're all over the world. People are talking war. Adolf Hitler's in charge of Germany. I think that they stopped Reif because they realized that he was on the verge of a weapon system that could kill biological beings, humans, with electromagnetic pulsing. And then you got Wilhelm Reich. He comes along in the 50s, and he's thrown in jail because Reich just sort of left the stage, but Reich, he kept going, and so the FDA, threw him in jail for 2 years, and he was dead in a year. So he was, and then they spent 10 years taking out everything that he had ever done, all of his writings, all of his devices, and he had also been absolutely. People reported cancer cures with Wilhelm Reich, but the more important thing that he had was called a cloudbuster, and he was able to demonstrate how he could actually control the weather. Okay, this is another point of, oh God, he's letting out the concepts of venerology out, and they're fighting for these weapons. To them it was a weapon system. But more importantly about the cloudbuster that I discovered at this time that I'm looking at this stuff is that the Oregon stream, because the FDA was intent upon destroying anything that had the word Oregon associated with it. They were very fixated on the word Oregon. If you're going through 10 years of destroying everything, they would have bonfires of his books and writings and devices. If you're that afraid of something that doesn't exist, this is kind of insane, so maybe it does exist. And it turns out that our whole concept of nuclear explosions, and I'm not going to get into it, but is all wrong. And essentially, Oregon can stop nuclear explosions. It also can put out the jet engines. It's a defense weapon. It can be used as a defense weapon. So it's another thing that's out there is that sometimes we take a shallow look. Not shallow, it's way, way deeper than other people are. But even under that, there's another layer of reasoning. And I'm getting to the point where I think if I just think in terms of military strategy, I'd probably have a better chance of figuring out what are they going to shut down next. And the question you asked earlier about, why are they rushing with this 5G? Well, because if they don't get this particular, and it's a weapon system, and it was not the Chinese that designed it. The Chinese have the equipment. It was actually American weapons experts, and maybe the Chinese were doing it too, but it was American weapons experts that designed the 5G system that, we talk about. Okay? So that was the Swiss, or Google, or whoever it was. That was an erroneous thing. But it's just like it's so much more war, kill, control. It's not always that money thing. Maybe we have to start looking at things in a way that I'm not even sure how yet. But I think that's why that they keep shutting down all of these. Now they're doing it for the pharmaceutical companies and the medical system. But back then, they were seeing this stuff as enerology, the study of energy. It's the key to everything. And they didn't want us to know.
And you're right. when people think purely in terms of power, they obsess in that direction. It becomes, it's like with any thought. You feed a thought form, and it gradually, it grows and it takes over your consciousness, whether it's an addiction. And if they read the world purely in terms of us against them and power, and we must have power over, and it poisons their entire frame of reference, their entire worldview. So yes, everything you've said to me just now, to the audience, it makes perfect sense to me. Because you're right, Rockefeller greed could account for some of what was going on with the AMA, but you're right, it wasn't that powerful at that point. And I'm like, how could you have shut that down that dramatically at that point? It was about weaponry.
Yeah, because cancer is an enormous industry, would be shut down if a cure like that were to be rolled out. But cancer industry is much, much bigger and more profitable today than it ever was in the 30s. So I can see that the other strategy of stopping it makes sense. And when you're talking about money and power, you know, at the level of the corrupt elite, and the puppeteers, you know, who are behind both political parties, you know, the left-right circus, they just like to keep us distracted with it so that we think there's something called democracy. But at the upper levels of the corrupt elite and the central banking families, it's not about money, because it's not that these people have a lot of money, although they have many trillions. It's that they own the concept of money. And they set out, over a couple of 100 years, it's a pretty well documented plan about how they were going to eventually be able to control the monetary system and do that. I mean, as Nathan Rothschild said, and I think it was about 1815, he said, "I care not what monarch sits on the throne of the empire, or the sun never sets. Whoever controls the currency controls the British Empire, and I control the currency." So, they knew that was the long-range plan. So, at that level, it's not about the money, having created a system whereby through fiat currency they have, in the way it's been manipulated at the upper levels, they can literally, they have the black screens. It's a very exclusive club, and you just log into your black screen, type in a bunch of zeros, and poof, you've, created money. That's also documented. That's out there. I was part of the coverage of that, of the global collateral accounts back in 2012, 2013. And so at these upper levels, it is not about the money. It is about control. And it is about the fear they have, that they must certainly reasonably have, that the awakening population is waking up, is waking up to this. And it's about, the most appalling array of crimes against humanity that you can possibly imagine. And that it's an existential crisis for them, this awakening population, because there are very few of them and there are very many of us. And if we quietly and peacefully exercise our sovereign rights and power, it's game over for them. And I believe it already is game over for them, but, it's pretty scary in the meantime, and we just got to keep doing what we're doing.
And can you imagine how terrifying it must have been for them when all of Greenland decided to jail the bankers and forgive all the mortgages?
Iceland,
Iceland, sorry. Yeah. And lo and behold, the culture didn't collapse. Life has gone on. All the mortgages were forgiven. And people say, oh, well, that couldn't possibly be done here because we're much bigger. Nonsense. It's debt forgiveness, because the debt is so rigged at this point. And
Yeah.
many of us,
I mean, it's
it's
that
a
whole concept
game.
of too big to fail. The bank said, well,
Yeah.
no. You have to prop us up with $26 trillion of bailout that didn't hit the news, because we're too big to fail. We're too central. Well, just exactly how did that particular kind of business get the right to be too big to fail? I mean, what prevents your local baker from saying, I now have 3 stores across town. I'm too big to fail. Prop me up. Bail me out. Let the
Well, and
local
it is,
citizens pay
yeah,
to rescue my business
and
because
it
I've
is.
screwed up through corrupt practices. And, the market's going, oh, says, sorry, bud. That's competition. That's free enterprise. Down you go. I mean,
Right.
actually, it's a kind of collectivist socialism on the Soviet model, only with a capitalist veneer, is what it really is.
That's exactly right, Ron.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
I did want to
go
mention,
ahead.
and I think I forgot to mention this earlier. There's the site EMF Reality does want you to know where the 5G towers will be, and they've posted their own map. So I'm going to send that link. If you go to emfacademy.com, they have a map, and of course it can only be as accurate as the information that they are given. We need to state that as a caveat, but the attempt is being made, so you can track this stuff and try to protect your family at a local level as much as possible. emfacademy.com. So.
Okay, well that's good stuff to have as well.
I've got them posted.
Yeah.
I've got them up in the chat. We'll put them at the on the YouTube at the bottom in the description.
Okay.
You had to take a run there, did you?
You got me. Yeah,
you forgot to mute it, and all of a sudden I'm hearing these little steps, running away. And then running back.
Funny, I forgot to mute it. I thought I was being very furtive.
Thing one and thing two, dashing through the living room, yeah.
Our dog here, Nula, was needing to get outside, and if the dog doesn't get outside, the inside runs the risk of having some environmental pollutants suddenly introduced, which I'd really not prefer to have appear on the floor in the middle of this radio show.
Yes. Speaking of environmental pollutants, I thought it was I know this is very tangential, but in talking about the ways that we're being led to believe that we are a free people and have our rights still after the having so many of them removed under the Patriot Act. It is now very similar to China, in my opinion. Did you know that protesting pipelines now can get you 10 years in prison and $100,000 in fines?
I know. I read that, and I just so wanted it to not be true, but I did a fair amount of study on what went down at Standing Rock, and yeah, that's how does that square with free speech? How does that square with American traditions? How does that square with the civil rights movement?
It goes along with free speech zones. I knew that we were in trouble when they when the big power people were meeting, and they said, well, you can protest, but it has to be so many blocks away in this little tiny area that we're going to fence in, and we'll call that your free speech zone. And you get to go stand way over there and be ignored and make a few little comments. But the big people are deciding what's going to happen with you and your world.
Right. Well, the thing about it is, and this goes to Mahatma Gandhi, is that you say, okay, so in violating the Constitution and our natural rights of free speech, you have designated this area over here. Well, en masse, we're going to ignore that. We are going to engage in civil disobedience. And so, of course, they'll have their corporate militia show up, militarized police, and as at Standing Rock, it was pretty much, corporate militia.
Yep.
And execute crimes against humanity, which is also what went down at Standing Rock. And, it's unfortunate that it still takes the world seeing, thank God for the internet, the blatant brutal tyranny and crimes against humanity committed by a corporate militia against peaceful protesters over, as at Standing Rock, the pollution of their sacred land, the violation of treaty rights, the desecration of the water. That it once again peaceful protest against brutal crimes against humanity. That eventually, according to the principles of satyagraha, ahimsa, the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi that Martin Luther King helped to implement in the civil rights movement, that that is still effective. It's just a sad commentary that we're still there. Where it's going to take civil disobedience on this scale to say, there's the rule of law, which means the higher law of the Golden Rule, the principles embedded in the International Declaration of Human Rights, which Eleanor Roosevelt helped introduce in 1948. Then there is bogus, leveraged, corrupt legislation sponsored by corporate lobbyists to protect their interests. It's like, well, it's the law. It's like, well, when you pass an immoral law, we then have to peacefully protest and do civil disobedience so that everybody wakes up to the fact that this is actually just a corporate agenda for greater control and tyranny. And unfortunately, it seems that that's where we're headed.
But it can work. That's the thing people need to realize. That whole powerlessness agenda that we're being encouraged to buy is really, it's an illusion. If you look at Ecuador, what happened, the indigenous peoples got out and protested in the streets. They led protests. It wasn't just the indigenous peoples, but that IMF loan that Ecuador had agreed to, they've gone back on it. They've backed out of it now. So,
well, I hadn't heard about that. That's a big deal.
That's a very big deal. Now, it did take large numbers in the streets. They had 2,000 people that were arrested or wounded, and they had 7 people killed. But they won.
Can you please give us a little bit more background information on it? What started it? It's IMF loan. Okay. Why would that cause the indigenous people to get into an uproar?
Well, part of what ticked people off about it the most was it was leading to a doubling of their diesel prices. They literally could not afford to get around anymore. But it also was causing tremendous climate destruction. The plan was to go in and exploit the resources, tear up the land, do away with all of the treaty rights that they had. And so they got out and said, no, we're just not going to have this.
Are you familiar with the economic assassin? John, what's his name? You ever heard the title?
Yeah, I think
I haven't read
it's actually
John
called
Perkins.
The book of Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
That's it, right, yes.
Yep.
John Perkins, is it? Anyway.
I'm going to look it up and post the link here.
Okay. His story, and you wonder how he survived to tell this story, but he did. So he must be, protected by the blessed ones. Essentially, what they would do was they would go into a country like Ecuador, and they would say, look, we'll give you this amazing loan, and you're going to be able to build your infrastructure, and therefore then you can be competing economically with the rest of the world. And so a number of presidents in South America said, no, we're not going to do that. And they all seem to have died very quickly after that, like 2 of them were in plane crashes. And the next guy that comes in says, oh, yeah, please, do. And what happens is that they've got this huge, enormous debt now. And they start building all of this stuff that doesn't care about the environment. It's just building. If you build this infrastructure and it's an infrastructure that you cannot use, it's not going to help you economically. It's going to put you under the foot of the International Banking Association.
And they know very well that the money cannot possibly be paid back. They
Never.
strategize that very carefully before they make the loan. It is purely an economic takeover.
Absolutely.
Right, and the collateral is your natural resources. Like, oh, you're not able to pay back the loan. Well, gee, we're gonna have to take that collateral you put up, namely your country, and trample over all of your natural rights and the environment in order to pull out your oil or whatever else it is that we decided we wanted, and which is why we targeted you for the loan in the first place.
And
why the people who proposed it died conveniently.
And this is a good example because the situation I talked about, they were able to assassinate a given person who was stopping them. But you know something? They couldn't stop the group of people that got together and said no. You can't kill them all. I remember one of the clearest memories I have of the Vietnam era was Georgetown University in New York had a big sign across one of its dormitories probably, but it said they cannot kill us all.
Mm-hmm.
So that I mean, yes, we're telling, and country after country has fallen for this. Did you find who it was that wrote that, Michael?
Yeah, I've actually posted it just a second ago, but I'll pull it up again.
Would you put it in
actually
Skype? Put it in Skype.
Oh, okay. Ignore that link. It's the wrong link. I'm going to give you a good link here in just a second. Yeah.
Because to read this particular, and it reads well. It's a narrative of his story, his life. It's not a hard read, but to get to the realization that these people knowingly were setting up countries for this. It gives you, first off, it gives you the concept of this is nothing new. This has been going on forever and ever. And the second thing, that you can stop it. When people wake up in a country and stop it, God bless Ecuador. God bless Iceland for not, for having the courage to say, this is nuts. This system is nuts. And they put the bankers in jail. And that's why nobody hears about it, because, my gosh, if everybody realized that, they'd be on a roll.
Yeah, they're not exactly covering it on MSNBC. It's like, oh, here's a novel strategy employed by the people of Iceland who seem to have taken the corrupt bankers and put them in jail. And their country has recovered, and the mortgages have been forgiven. And now back to your Verizon commercial pushing 5G. We're not going to see that on mainstream, of course, because mainstream is owned by those companies. I'm just getting a little note here. You're probably aware of this, Nancy, but this is not going out over Cosmic Reality Radio today. We are, so thank God for the recording, but at least here, Eleni is telling me that there's no Radio 5G player on the phone or the computer. So unfortunately, our audience that usually tunes in is not able to listen live to us. Do you have any update on that, Nancy?
My system says it's streaming, so I'm thinking it might be the website itself. During the break, I'll take a look at the station and see what's happening.
Okay, well, if that's the case, our apologies to our live listeners, and we'll let everybody know that the show is happening, and hopefully we'll be able to get it up.
Okay, ask Lenny to check and see if it's going over alternative radio. Click on that.
She's gonna check on that alternative radio.
I'm looking at Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the book by John Perkins. And apparently there is a newer edition called The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. So it may have more recent evidence of what's going on in the American empire and how all that is being played out in the world in our name. So.
Right. And it is, I think it's important, or at least I feel as an American, to understand what's being played out in our name, versus what, the character of the American people is, and what if our democracy was actually functioning and the higher principles upon which this country was founded were actually being implemented. Because if you look at what's been done in our name, I mean, it can really induce a sense of shame at what's been done. As an American, I certainly feel it, but I also know the true nature of the country, of the people, of the character, of where we came from, what we stand for, what the great good that America has done in the world, and I stand with that. And I encourage all of us in this country to remember that, yes, we need to own up, for our responsibility and to the degree to which each of us and also collectively have cooperated with this. But there has been, a very deliberate, long-standing, corrupt elite campaign to, take over and subjugate and pretty much suppress the actual, republic, the actual democratic principles of this country, so that the military might and the economic might of this country could be used by those corrupt factions for their agenda, for their ends, to have our brave young men and women in the armed forces be used as their economic hit team on the military level. So, you gin up a fear-mongering scenario like weapons of mass destruction, which didn't exist in Iraq, and in we go, and so, as an American, I remember, all right, if you go to what the Civil War was really about, in the long term, those corrupt factions, the international bankers at the time really did not want to see a strong, united America overcoming the divisions of slavery and moving forward to, especially when Lincoln turned down the London bankers' offer of, we'll finance your war at like 25% interest. And he said, no, thanks. We're just going to print paper money and trust our citizens to pay it back so we can save our country. I mean, that was a nightmare scenario for those folks. So we know what happened to President Lincoln. But, I'm getting a little bit off track here, but it feels important to me that, my great-grandfather fought at Gettysburg. My father served as a Navy medical corpsman to the 5th Marine Division on Iwo Jima. I am proud to be an American. I revere the true American heroes such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, and many others who knew what this country was about as a beacon of freedom to people around the world who wanted to get away from the tyranny of these corrupt factions. So, it's a story that many of us are aware of about, the Aldrich Act in 1913, the creation of the Federal Reserve, which is a private banking cartel. There's nothing federal or reserve about it. And, the long struggle to restore the Republic. And I feel that struggle is going into overdrive right now. And from what we're hearing, push is coming to shove. And in this freedom movement, and 5G is a big part of that because it's the control system they are desperate to put in place so that they can reverse the shift that's happening. And so I'm proud to see a lot of Americans and people around the world, but Americans particularly waking up to this and being true to the tradition of what it means in this country. Because Patriot Act or no, you can't eliminate from the American character, don't tread on me. You can't eliminate from the American character our innate sense of our right to free speech. And in the long run, I just got to believe, trying to say, sorry, we've woken up to the fact there's more of us than there are of you, and we are peacefully taking our country back.
Yes, and I'm reminded of what I heard a gentleman say one night after a meeting. We had talked about 5G, and he was standing nearby on the plaza, and it wasn't evening. I think it was we had a booth to let people know at the farmers market. We were educating people, and he said, "Well, if they think they can get away with this, they don't know Taos." He said, "We'll just go out and shoot the damn things." I'm not advocating violence in any way, because I don't think as a strategy it's the most effective strategy. However, when the American people decide to put their foot down, they really mean it. You don't want to stir up a bunch of Americans, because we have a capacity for being ticked off that is, I don't know if it compares to how it compares to other countries, but let's just say maybe we're still a little in the early stage of our how can I put this delicately? I'm not saying that we're barbaric, but we have a lot of guns, and there are people who truly have just no tolerance for oppression. It's a very fundamental thing for us. It's not like we've been around for thousands of years here, being used to being oppressed by kings and nobles, and they're trying to somehow acclimate us to the idea, obviously, that corporate rulership and the nonsense that they pass off as democracy at the federal level, that somehow we're just going to all be subdued to that. But what I sense in the people is a very fundamental sense of, oh no, we know BS when we see it, and we're not going to put up with it. So I think once you wake this gang up, you could get a lot of spark out of them, and I think we're getting there pretty rapidly. People are pretty disgusted with the whole business. And once people start getting sick and their kids have got cancer and their animals are dropping dead, yeah.
You look at history, like, I think there's a quote from the Japanese Admiral Yamamoto, I want to say, who was the strategic planner behind the Pearl Harbor attacks, that he knew that if the Japanese did not score an early quick victory, that it was going to be curtains for them. And the quote is, after the Pearl Harbor attacks, he said, "We have awakened a sleeping giant." And that was it, essentially, because you got the American people totally ticked off. Whatever it was, 2,000 or so Americans died in those attacks. Now we know that same psychology has been used in multiple false flags to get the public to line up behind whatever war one set of corrupt elite or another decided was the war they needed to have fought for them to acquire the natural resources or whatever the other agenda might have been. But it's also a characteristic of the American people. I mean, they read us right, that the same thing happened in the Civil War, actually. The huge psychological shift that took place in the North when the Confederates in Charleston fired on the flag, and they fired on Fort Sumter, which was only seeking to be peacefully resupplied. Suddenly, all this division and doubt and discouragement and chaos in the North, it vanished overnight. There was just what was described as an eagle scream of rage that went across the North, and suddenly Lincoln's got, he puts out a call for 80,000 volunteers, and 200,000-300,000 came forward because the governors of each state said, "Mr. President, I cannot suppress the patriotic fervor of our people. in the face of this attack. So, and it's coming to that point, it's right there is what it feels like to me. And of course, because mainstream is not reporting it, it is, again, thank God for the internet, that because 30, 40 years ago, it was just, the New York Times is the newspaper of record for the United States. And, gosh, the Washington Post, Woodward and Bernstein exposed Nixon. So, on we go with the beautiful tradition of the Fourth Estate protecting us from the evil. That's been history for a long time. And the fact that this radio show is happening, we are live on alternate radio there, Nancy, but not on Cosmic Reality. So this will go out on YouTube. But the fact that this and so many other places across the web, some tainted, some co-opted, some full of disinformation, but within all that, there's plenty for us to use our discernment to look at to see what's really going on. So we're at the break here on Radio 5G. In fact, we're a little bit past it. So Nancy, if you're ready with the music, we're going to go for our break.
And we're back.
Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Radio 5G. This is Michael Henry Dunn with my co-host Nancy Hopkins and our special guest and good friend, Falcon Britt. And we are currently live streaming on alternative radio. And Nancy, just a quick check-in update. Are we happening at Cosmic Reality Radio? And what do we think might be the issue? Is this... because there have been rumors of more obvious shutdowns of alternative news sources going down. Are we just dealing with the technical issue here? What do you see happening?
I have no clue. I couldn't get this. My system says I'm streaming. Obviously is getting to France where the streamer is because Alternative is picking it up. And he's got a direct link in there. So, for some reason, it's not getting down to my players on, the Cosmic Reality. But then I couldn't even get into the server itself until just now. So I haven't even looked to see what is actually happening. Probably we should check and see if the players are up. I think it's a server thing over in France, but I'm not sure. So I'm working on it. But I'm more concerned about getting a good recording at this point in the game. You know what I'm saying? We've already lost the audience. They don't know where we went.
The same kind of thing is happening on YouTube, by the way. There are a number of people that I kind of monitor and keep up with on YouTube. And not just truther sites, but interestingly, lightworker sites. People that are bringing knowledge not just of the awakening, but the ascension process, and they're having their numbers tampered with. They're having, for instance, 1 minute they'll have 50,000 followers, and then all of a sudden it drops and it'll show 20,000, and their subscribers are being unsubscribed or not getting notifications of when things come out. It's very interesting to me because you can see the attempt to shift, to modify and censor not just the awareness of news, but actual consciousness raising and empowerment of people. They're deliberately sitting on a lot of that too.
Well, they know that the two are linked. At the upper levels, they certainly know that the lever of consciousness is where the real shift takes place. And they are aware that whatever you want to call the ascension dynamic, that it's a very real and powerful fact of a rising of human consciousness at this time, which means an end to their control grid. And so, there's a reason that the black SUVs and the black helicopters show up whenever Mary Hardy and her group perform the Holy Grail protocol, which literally pierces through the control grid to allow light and pure spirit of divine love and the truth of the soul to start manifesting on the planet. I mean, they do this Holy Grail protocol, and go ahead and YouTube Mary Hardy Holy Grail protocol if you want a 10-15 minute video that'll show you what specific metaphysical laws are being used, practices are being used. There's a reason that when they do this at various power sites around the world, within about half an hour, they're getting buzzed by black helicopters, or a black SUV shows up, or a phony-looking repair truck, a white van suddenly shows up about 50 yards away, and a couple of guys come out and stand by the van. They are aware that this is perhaps the most powerful tool we have. I mean, the political activism is key. Radio shows like this are key. The huge service performed by the 5G Crisis Summit with all the experts from many different aspects of the 5G, Stop 5G movement are gathered. And yeah, it's not surprising. And I don't know how many of you might have seen the Simon Parkes video. It's about maybe 12 minutes long, in which he shares information he has from some of his sources that, and this was from only about a week ago, that there is a imminent shutdown of freedom and Lightworkers sites that is coming, and he says it's not going to be a government shutdown. This is not under some aspect of the Patriot Act or whatever. This is being implemented by corporate elements. In other words, okay, Facebook, Google, YouTube, etc. Well, guess who owns those companies? Guess whose agenda those companies are serving? Guess whose definition of fake news gets to be implemented? Well, fake news is anything that questions the agenda. So if we're beginning to see this, there was a specific timeline that Simon Parkes described as being active, which he said was a potential showdown, push comes to shove, final showdown between, the cabal, the corrupt elite, whatever we want to call them, and the freedom movement, white hats, good guys, various factions within the military and intelligence communities that are actively supporting the takedown of the cabal, the takedown of the elite pedophilia network, that it's push is coming to shove, and that because whether you're pro-Trump or against Trump, the reality is that under his administration, a lot of forward movement has happened in the takedown of these corrupt factions, that whether it's under the cover of the perceived chaos, because he's, this unpredictable loose cannon, and he's not going along with the deep state, and yes, there is one. That this is what Simon Parkes said we're likely to see within the coming weeks. The time frame he gave was pretty much between now and Thanksgiving, and that some pretty major revelations were scheduled, evidence being presented, indictments being brought forward against very prominent figures on both sides of the aisle. So we'll see. Hopefully this is just our little technical glitch, but realistically,
it probably was, because I'm now getting the players on my phone, and I just got the website back. So I think it was something that was weird with the website over in France, the server for this station.
Okay. Well, there is that. Not everything is a tool of the corrupt cabal. There's just glitches and stuff. But at least it gave us a chance to talk about something that we definitely know is happening elsewhere.
This is true. It's also of interest to me how much light is rising that they truly cannot avoid it on a metaphysical level. Because if you look, for instance, at some of the news, they're so sloppy now. in trying to convince us of things, whether it's supposedly the conservative or the liberal. It's, they'll say, oh, these poor people have all been massacred, and they're lying. You got supposedly the bodies of children lined up under sheets, and then you notice that they're wiggling because they're not really dead kids at all. They're actors. And there's times they're using the same actors over and over to try to convince us that something has happened. And people are really starting to see through this. So even if you take off the truth off the air, if you keep presenting this complete BS, it's like the universe is saying, no, it's coming to light, and you can't just keep pushing it down. Whether it's the pedophilia, it will out.
Right, and there is this rather notorious example recently where ABC News, I believe, was forced to apologize because they were airing they were airing footage of supposedly into Syria, which turned out actually to be some local American footage. I don't want to I'm being careful of what I say here because I want to be accurate. Say again? Yeah, it was a gun range in Kentucky that ABC News was airing as being, the devastation being wrought in Syria by President Trump's blah, 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 right? And lo and behold, they had to confess, okay, gee, we don't know how we somehow bought, a gunnery range in Kentucky as being Syria. Maybe our correspondent got on the wrong plane or something, how they cover their butts on that, I can't imagine. But it's getting pretty naked, and embarrassing. And but how many people continue to want to sleepwalk? Well, it was ABC News. It was Sam Donaldson or whatever. No, sad to say, Sam works for an arm of the cabal, which is unfortunately what our news sources have become.
And you want I wanted to believe that there would be sources that somebody out there in some form of mainstream that could be trusted, and yet you hear people at this point, I can trust none of it. It's when you hear a Rhodes Scholar say that there've never been any such thing as false flags, for example, and you go, "What? I'm not a Rhodes Scholar. I didn't even study politics."
Don't use that term, please. It will take us right down off of YouTube. Do not use the FF word.
Oh, okay.
It's one of their triggers. Sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted you to know.
We could bleep it out for the sake of the censors.
Wow. Well, that is. I didn't know that, Nancy, because I used the term a little earlier. And the Rhodes Scholar that we're referring to, I think, is probably Rachel Maddow.
Yes.
Am I right? Right.
Yep.
So, and her father was a naval officer. So, the fact that somebody as bright as Rachel Maddow, and there's no doubting the woman's intelligence, could actually so willfully ignore, the documented FFs in history. Yeah.
You can go online and find a list of them, like 20, over 24, 25 of them, where governments have admitted and gone into detail about exactly what happened.
Yeah, and to say, oh, no, that just doesn't happen anymore. And I was like, well, there is, Operation Northwoods, and that is declassified, and that is the Joint Chiefs of Staff approving a blatant FF, involving attacks on American citizens with phony Cuban insignia on planes in order to get the public to line up behind an invasion of Cuba to take out Castro. And JFK, who had actually seen his friends die in World War II because he'd actually served, said, no, I don't think we are going to approve this insanity or something like that. And so, Operation Northwoods did not get implemented at that time. But yeah, it's, the fact that Nancy has to cut in and remind us that this is a term, a historically validated reality term that will get us, banned from YouTube. Well, what does that tell you about YouTube? So I know we're preaching to the choir here, but
we're in Brave New World. There are words that are okay and words that are not okay.
I want to jump in on this Rachel thingy because I watched her religiously for years and years from the moment she started. And one day she spent 20 minutes, I actually checked the time, 20 minutes, telling me that I was an idiot because there is no danger to fluoride. And in fact, it is very beneficial. 20 minutes. She went on a rant.
Oh, wow.
Okay? I've never listened to the bitch since. Because at that moment, and this was not that, at that moment you had the Fluoride Alert Network and you had no countries outside of the United States and a couple of others that was using fluoride. It was absolutely crashing. And she has not only is she a Rhodes Scholar, but she has a team of very excellent people, researchers, and they don't know the truth.
And
she would not she called us idiots.
It's like waving a big red flag saying, I am compromised.
Oh,
and to
totally.
me, that's like the FF thing. The night that she announced there had never been any such thing. I'm like, that's like saying there's never been a sun in the sky. I'm not even a history major, and it's all that evidence is out there. So
Gulf of Tonkin. Hello.
Kristallnacht with the Nazis. Kristallnacht for crying out loud.
Yeah, hello. That was even in our high school textbooks.
9/11, for instance.
Yep.
Those things happen. See, this is the problem. They happened. Yes, they happened. But the scenario involving how they happened is what is wrong. You're falling for the same story over and over and over. The other guy did it. The other guy did it. The other guy did it. Not me. Oh,
yeah,
no.
We would never do that.
We would never do that
those
to you.
Nasty Nazis, right?
And why
those nasty Nazis.
Why do they do it? To put us in a state of fear. Because if you're in a state of fear, you're willing to give up your rights. And
exactly.
you give up your rights, you can give for security. You're going to have neither. I think that was Ben Franklin that said that.
And there's a quote, maybe it's Hermann Goering or one of the top Nazi officials, forget which one of them was in charge of propaganda, that during the Nuremberg trials, after they'd lost, he said, well, it's not that hard to get people to go to war. Most people are quiet and they just go about their business and they don't want to go to war. So here's what you have to do to get them to go to war. Just tell them a really big lie, the bigger the better, and demonize, the neighboring country and get, and then, if they're not cooperating, well, you just, create an attack and make it look like them and just, get them to demonize and hate the other country through fear. And then you can rouse ordinary, peace-loving, people who just want to, take care of their families and have a better life, line up and, start goose-stepping off to Poland. So, when you see something, like you say, the more emphatic the denial. No, this has never happened. This, you must not even think this if you are to be in my audience of enlightened liberals. That is just such a giveaway, as you say. It reminds me of the work that I've done around Shakespeare. As part of my background, and I was a professional Shakespearean actor, and I always dismissed as a bunch of poppycock the idea that somebody else wrote the plays. I said a bunch of snobs who don't want to believe that a kid from a provincial town could, be the greatest poet and playwright. But eventually I started running across the facts and the evidence, and it's an interesting long story we can go into another time. But the parallel here is that there's a website called doubtaboutwill.org, and it's quite similar to the websites about 9/11 with the architects and engineers who all signed a petition and say, I'm sorry, skyscrapers don't fall in their footprint like that unless it's a controlled demolition, and there's reasonable doubt about the official story here. And so if you go to doubtaboutwill.org, there's a petition signed by hundreds of degreed academics saying reasonable grounds exist to doubt the attribution of the Shakespeare plays to the Glover's son from Stratford-upon-Avon, and it should be studied. It's just something that's worthy of study, right? And then you get people like, the professor in charge of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust in Stratford is talking about a totally threatened, entrenched interest. They're going, these people are fruitcakes. They are psychotic. They are nuts. You must not listen to them. They are, And of course, he's talking about people like Sir Derek Jacobi, Sir John Gielgud, Orson Welles, Sigmund Freud. I mean, these are the people he's dismissing as nutsos. So when you see that, yeah, it's pretty much, as strong an indication as you can find. Yeah, the more reasonable thing for Rachel Maddow to have said, if she'd actually was being objective and neutral, and she could have said, well, certainly we know of documented FFs in history. And there is, of course, Kristallnacht, and there is, the Mexican War, and this, go on and on and on. But whether, such incidents continue to exist, or whether we have reached a point where our military is, clearly controlled by our beautiful democracy, blah, blah, blah. She could have set up some kind of reasonable debate, still tilted it a little bit in her favor of her view. But the blanket denial is just, as you say, Falcon, it's the big red flag. I am compromised. I am corrupted. My job is on the line, and I am towing the party line. Yeah.
The problem reaction solution paradigm has been around. It of course goes back to Hegel, but in the problem reaction solution paradigm, and David Icke talks about this, the government will create a problem and then blame it on others, and then the people, of course, will react by saying, oh, well, you must help us with this. This problem is terrible, and we will give up our rights so that you can deal with this, even if we have to give up our rights to deal with this, not realizing that they've been set up. And then, of course, the government, which has already prepared a solution before it even created the crisis, will say, oh, yes, well, we have this wonderful legislation. The Patriot Act, for instance, was written and ready to be put out there. Promptly, and in fact, there's some evidence that it was written well ahead of time.
Right, and I was just going to say, I might have said this on an earlier show. Forgive me if I have, but my favorite example of this is The Princess Bride, Prince Humperdinck. Right, it's everybody's favorite, medieval romantic comedy, and it's a wonderful movie, but it's got an exposure of FFs woven totally into the plot line. It's where, Wesley, the young hero, is trying to rescue his sweetheart, and he's been put in the dungeon to be tortured. And the torturer guy says to Prince Humperdinck, well, would you like to come down to the dungeon to see my work? I'm going to put Wesley on the pain machine. And Prince Humperdinck says, oh, you know how I enjoy seeing your work, but I have my wedding to plan, my wife to murder, and the country of Gilder to blame for it. I'm swamped, Yep. That's basically what the whole plot line of that sweet little fairy tale movie is, an exposure of FFs. You know,
Yes.
and it's hilarious. It's in plain sight in pop culture.
Which means we can wake up from it. We truly
Exactly.
can. How many times can you run the same game on the same old dog, and eventually the dog, you, even a dog eventually will realize when he's being played. We are beginning to wake up, and the question is, can we make the young aware, or are they even more aware than the older generations? I'm not really sure. Because with each new generation, they can get taken in by the same game again if they're not aware.
Yeah, well, I think that the existence of the internet, even as compromised as it is, as censored as it is, that now we've got to be vigilant because they're going to slowly roll back the information.
Oh
Um,
yes, the
the
net
existence of
neutrality.
books.
Net
Hello, the
neutrality is
existence
a
of books, of encyclopedias, from 30 or 40 years ago that were not censored, that were not having things excised from them. We're going to, God forbid, we have to turn to those, and I also hope, we can preserve that precious legacy. But even still, right now, today, the fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that, of all of the other alternative news sources that are still operative, it's, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. They want to use the web as the ultimate means of control, but it's also the ultimate means of freedom and of truth getting out there. So my feeling about it is that it is too late. The younger generation seems to be, yes, cynical, but they're also like rebels without a cause. They're looking to be inspired, looking for something real. What can we really do? They see what's happening to the planet, what the chaos politically and morally that's going on, and they are waking up. I mean, there's a program up in Boulder called Grail Leadership. Teaching young leaders, how these timeless principles, that were embodied in the Code of Chivalry, that these principles haven't gone away, and they are coming back, and there are ways to lead from that high servant leader mode that are still alive. So I'm hopeful. I'm a hopeful guy by nature, but I see solid reasons for it, for hope
I do
these
too,
days.
Michael, and so many innovative cooperations are evolving between us and um, the energetics of Earth, the beings of Earth. For instance, the Wild Foundation, they are managing to save species by working with a type of, they're not elementals, but in a way they are. It's an elemental consciousness called underbuddies, which is just a term that David Spangler came up with at the Lorien Foundation. They are interested in helping the Earth and helping us, and I wouldn't say that they're programmable, and I don't believe in programming other consciousnesses. I think that's manipulative. But they can be worked with, and you can, um, it's astonishing. They're getting amazing results. If you go to wild.org, wild.org, that foundation, with people like Timothy Haas of the Lorien Foundation, and the help of the Underbuddies and the She, who, as I said, I think in a previous program, are like a version of humans that didn't really incarnate. Some of them are willing to work with us to shift things. And of course, we've got the angelics, we've got other dimensional levels of ourselves and of our star families. And it is really, it's becoming a very interesting game out there now, because if you thought that just the humans that you can see, the ones that are in your visual range, are the ones that can make any changes here. Large numbers of us are now waking up to the fact that, oh no, we've got allies. The whole universe wants to see this shift because we're affecting the whole universe because of we're part of the fabric of all things. We're part of what happens here affects them. If we fire off a nuclear, for example, a nuclear bomb, it rips the fabric of space-time and damages and affects them. So even for self-preservation, they would have to get involved. But they actually do care. Not that all ETs are benevolent. I'm not saying that. Life is complicated out there as it is here. But there are tremendous numbers of beings that are willing to work with us and attempting to communicate and work with us. And as people's telepathy increases, and it is increasing, we're all becoming far more intuitive. I wouldn't be surprised at some point if we won't need cell phones. I would truly, I'm not sure at what point that will evolve, but people are becoming so much more psychic and so much more able to read things long distance. And it's a natural skill that we always had. We just turned it off because we got distracted into the spoken verbal patterns of communication. But as those things evolve, as consciousness evolves and the cooperative partnerships with these other forms of consciousness, God's been a very busy creator, whether you call it God or the universe. It's got a lot going on. And just because it's outside of our very tiny little visual range for most people at this point, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist and that we can't work with it, because we're getting very concrete evidence that we can. They've done some really amazing things through the Wild Foundation.
Yeah, I've shared that link. It's going to be on our YouTube along with these other good links that we've got. It's funny, I was watching an old interview with Bill Moyers interviewing George Lucas about the influence that Joseph Campbell had on the creation of the whole Star Wars universe for Lucas. And he was talking about the full range of fantastic realities that we are not yet in touch with. And he said, if you go to the Stone Age, Cro-Magnon man, Neanderthals, whatever, they were on a scale of everything to be known on a scale of 1, and maybe we've gotten up to 4 or 5, but the thing we need to remember is that the scale goes to 1 million.
Yeah.
That's actually where we are. This is not, 1 to 5 out of 10. This is, in fact, where we are in this. And I'm certainly feeling, to some extent, this awakening and greater intuitive ability to communicate that you're describing. Others I know, more gifted than I am, are experiencing it even more. And in regard to that, as we're looking at our last 15 minutes here, as we're looking down the timeline in the next few weeks and months, if in fact we are approaching a showdown place where the long anticipated moment when a lot of things get revealed, what has been a behind-the-scenes war, becomes more overt and unignorable. And if we're dealing with, outright shutdown of free speech, outright, we'll see, according to the Simon Parkes video, his information was that a Marine Corps Major General had been authorized to call up 40,000 reserve, that a lot of veterans organizations were also in place in order to stand ready for a movement to take down the cabal. Now, there is always the caution, and I want to take a moment to just emphasize this, that historically, the way the cabal has worked. And, there's an authorized history of the Rothschild family that the Rothschilds themselves cooperated with. It's hard to find anymore, published back in 1961, that describes how in every revolution that took place, the central banking families managed to ally themselves with the rebels, or have factions within the rebels, or have, what is called controlled opposition, such that when we are overthrowing the evil regime which has cooperated with these corrupt bankers to enslave the people, lo and behold, there's a revolution, and guess who's in bed with the new regime?
Yep.
Same old folks. So we really need to be cautious about this, because some of my sources tell me that there is a faction which we refer to as the Rainbows, which are basically the nice, new, shiny, friendlier version of the same old cabal, that rather than have terrified and emaciated cattle on their way to the slaughterhouse, they want to have fat, happy, drugged cattle on their way to the slaughterhouse. And that we just need to be wary of this, because, takedown of the fiat currency system, everything's happy, everybody's going to get, multi-million-dollar checks on their Iraqi dinar, and isn't it wonderful that the good guys won? Well, there is also the inner light network, and that is, to me, if you believe in it, which I do, is the higher level of infiltration of high souls of integrity, infiltrated into all the same major branches of government, pharmaceuticals, military, industrial, fossil fuel, etc., who are working on behalf of true human freedom, not just the reboot of the same old people in the new happy regime where, guess what, you're still on your way to the slaughterhouse, but incorporating angelic, devic, elemental, benign, off-world elements that are the true friends of human freedom and of spiritual evolution, the true friends of love and compassion. That this is a reality, and that the chaos moment we seem to be in and approaching. As we go through it, these heightened intuitive abilities, supposing this website gets shut down and others like it, and they're shutting down light worker websites and truth websites. This is a question I'd like to pose to both, Nancy and Falcon here. How would you see, what are the practical measures that we can suggest to people? What do we do when that happens? What kind of, yes, there's, taking care of yourself and your family and reaching out to your local community, measures like that. And then on the intuitive and metaphysical levels. And of course, let's not forget Shungite, the use of that powerful reality. So, I hope this isn't too vague a question, but if the dirt's hitting the fan in the coming weeks and months, how do we handle it?
Nancy, we haven't heard from you in a few minutes. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't care if it happens in the next 5 minutes or in 50 years from now. As long as you are your authentic self, you'll be fine. This is not a game of the 3D. This is a game of multi-levels being played. And the only thing we can bring to the table is to maintain our sense of self-identity, of being absolutely in tune with what we find our present moment to be, not the past and not the future, because this stuff comes at you a little bit at a time. And then you just get used to, okay, we just did that, okay, and stay objective. Don't let yourselves fall into their traps of fear and emotion. And know that if we just get into that position, that we will be given every tool we need to make the next leap. See, it's like a chess game, and every time they make a move, they change the board. And when they change the board, it doesn't knock us down. It actually steps us up. You know what I'm saying? It's like their playing is playing our game. You know, I forget who one of the gurus of war said, you know, don't interrupt your opponent if they're destroying themselves. And every move that they make just is sillier and sillier and sillier. It doesn't make any sense. They're insane. So if we just let that insanity begin to fade away and focus, I'm not saying not understand it. Understand it, but don't get involved in it. You know, we're playing this other game right here, building a new reality, one where each and every human being and every single thing in nature is paramount, every single thing, and that you feel the unification of all life. Because if you can get at that point, then it's like having an army of light and like beings who, no matter what they put, what move they make, we're going to be able to counteract it, and basically by reaching into the concept of love. You know, we are loving people. We are loving. Life is nature. Nobody sent us here to go through all this crap. Somebody sent them to cause this crap. But light's going to win. Truth is going to win. The game has been fixed for that. It's just, what's the story? What's the story? And in some cases, you have some leader that leads you into a wonderful new reality. But that leader is going to die, or they're going to get compromised, or something's going to happen. You cannot bet on any leader. You have to bet on ourselves. And when you bet on yourself and you're authentic, you have to realize that you're also responsible. With great power comes great responsibility. And if you want to play the light worker game, then you play it by saying, I'm playing the game because it's my responsibility. Not to find some leader that'll take it away from us, but my responsibility to make the changes. And if I'm only capable of making the changes in my own little piece of the puzzle, then that's enough. Because if everybody does that, then that's enough.
Because you're right. Our nature is to be love. We come from a being that creates. It emanates love and supports life radiantly. Billions upon billions of life forms, just endlessly by its very nature. And so it makes sense. Our true self is that. And they're finding increasingly, we used to believe in the Darwinian concept that everything was about competition. And the illusion has been told to us that, oh, well, if people are in trouble, they'll just immediately all fall to rioting and chaos will ensue. But in fact, that's not been found to be true. People fall into supporting each other. And frankly, if we're outside of the matrix, the more attention we pull away from it, the illusion that we're all supposed to be competing and this is horrible and we must fight and go steal from our neighbors what they have. And that's all a crock, and we don't fall into it naturally. So the more that we disengage our attention from that illusory paradigm, the more we will actually disempower that old illusion. It'll crash, because what we'll see around us, of course, is, oh, no, that's my neighbor. I know them. So I would say, get to know your neighbor. Let's be mutually supportive. The only thing that has really been fostered out of that old paradigm of fear is ego. And so you will probably have a few people in the neighborhood who think that they're doing us favors by saying, all right, I'm so-and-so, and I have these abilities, and you should listen to me because I know what to do, and I'm taking charge. Well, you don't have to. You don't have to. So let's just be mutually supportive, keep our egos down, and we'll be fine. Truly. I agree with you, Nancy.
Well, I've probably been in more disasters, in quotes, here in South Florida because of the number of hurricanes I've gone through. And every time you lose the power and the trees are down and everything, the neighborhood comes together.
It happens in North Carolina too when we have the tornadoes that come through.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if there's nothing and nobody's got anything that they turn on each other, but I don't see that either. I watch Survivor, the television program.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to look at it as, how do people deal with each other who are strangers in an environment that is very taxing. And, the vast majority of those, they're all good people. It's not like, that sometimes they're lying and sometimes they're cheating and sometimes they're doing these things, but in their heart they're doing it because that's the way to survive. But we know that if we come together we can do this. Because they're telling us that we can't because we're separate and blah, 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 It's like, no, we can do this, and I think it's being done. Actually, I think it's done. Just what's the story of getting there?
Right, Nancy. It's like what a guy I know pretty well in Egypt, in Luxor, lived through both Egyptian revolutions, both the one that overthrew, Mubarak, who had had a state of emergency for 30 years. It had become a police state. And they functioned. There was a famous FF that was a supposedly terrorist attack on a Coptic church to create, to maintain the divisions between the Coptic church, which is a major element in Egypt, and the Muslims. And the Egyptian people weren't buying it. Anyway, so it led to, there was the first famous revolution in Egypt, which was part of the Arab Spring, and, Tahrir Square, and the army eventually siding with the people. And the government had maintained power, as such governments usually do, by instilling fear and division and telling people, look, we are the only thing that's keeping you people from tearing each other's throats, right? Well, once the revolution happened, the police state disappeared. The police literally disappeared because they didn't dare come out of their houses because they'd been, corrupted by the state and used as instruments of terror. So it was just the people. And this is what happened. Just as you described, people formed neighborhood committees. They started to look out for each other. If there were criminal elements, they had neighborhood watch committees. The Muslims protected the Christians while they prayed in Tahrir Square, and the Christians protected the Muslims while they prayed. And, when the Muslim Brotherhood ended up coming to power and the Egyptian people then saw through them, and there was the second revolution, the same thing happened. And my friend said this really restored his faith in human nature, that the Darwinian model is false, that people will naturally turn to cooperation and helping each other. How can we pool our resources? How can we make sure everybody's okay? Hey, we know there's the lady down the street who's, going to need her medicine. Somebody go check in on her. I mean, this is actually, for most folks, where we instinctively go. And
let me jump in here, Michael, because
go ahead.
I want to bring this back to what we sort of started with. Let's look at what the reality is that we're building versus the one we left. We know what that is. But in this reality, Rife's technology cures cancer.
Right.
We've got devices that will give you free energy.
And sacred geometry, we're understanding sacred geometry. This can be a tremendously fun thing. I know that sounds really paradoxical. When you watch everything kind of collapse around you, your ego wants to go, oh no. But in fact, this could be a lot of fun. I want to keep that spirit of fun alive because this is possibilities. This is new realities that we can bring into being that could be completely better. We could change medicine. We can change education. We can change government. We can change economics. I mean, and have we really been all that happy with what we've had? No. So let's keep the spirit of possibility and fun alive and innovation and talk together. I think we could come up with an astonishingly much better world on all levels. I truly do.
Well, amen to that. And I've brought up a quote, might be familiar to a lot of folks, but as we wrap things up here on Radio 5G, quote from Buckminster Fuller, from whom comes the fullerene, the buckyball, the remarkable reality of the powerful element in Shungite. Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Now, here on Radio 5G, we got to walk a fine line because, as Nancy was saying, we need to be aware of the problem. I think it was actually Falcon said it. We need to be aware. We need to know what they're trying to put across with the 5G rollout. We need to take back our power as sovereign citizens, and at the same time, focusing on the new reality, the new model that makes the old one obsolete. It'll just fall away through irrelevancy. If we do it right, there's going to be some. It'll probably be a bumpy road, as Thomas Jefferson said. We cannot expect to be carried from tyranny to freedom in a feather bed, right? So it's not as if it's going to be a rose garden here. But the key thing is to know the truth of what's going on without succumbing to fear, without succumbing to the divisive tribalism, old tactics they've used for centuries to keep us from following our natural human inclination to help each other. So if we stay with that, I think we're all right. We're going to make it around this corner to a beautiful restoration, not only of the planet, but of human freedom. So we're now near the end. In fact, this is the wrap-up for Radio 5G. For today, this is Michael Henry Dunn. I want to thank my co-host Nancy Hopkins of Cosmic Reality Radio, and it's a joint project with the Sacred Academy of Global Evolution. And once again, thanks Falcon Britt. Falcon, it's just always such a pleasure to have you with us. Heartfelt thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. I love pinging the ideas around with you guys.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, everybody, we'll see you next time. And tune into the YouTube. We're going to share it around with everybody. And God bless us, everyone. Bye for now.